Hi, this is Carrie Brownstein.
This is DJ Premier.
This is Darren Aronofsky.
You got the RZA right here.
Rose McGowan.
Radiohead.
Aisha Tyler.
Tribe Called Quest. Fred Armisen.
Prince Paul.
Javier Munoz. Seth Meyers.
Frankie Cosmos.
Flying Lotus.
Hi, we're Chaim, and you're listening to the Talkhouse Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Talkhouse Podcast. I'm Josh Modell. On this week's episode, we've got two old friends whose bands started around the same time and who've had very different albums hit the 20-year mark recently. Jim Adkins of Jimmy Eat World and Davey von Bohlen of The Promise Ring. Now, I had the idea to pair these guys after seeing a bunch of best of emo lists floating around the internet lately, and it reminded me of the heady days of the late 90s and early 2000s and how many fond memories I have of those times. I saw The Promise Ring and Jimmy Eat World plenty of times back then. Full disclosure, I was then and am now friends with the guys in The Promise Ring. It occurred to me that while the two bands had been on similar trajectories back then, that they diverged right around 20 years ago in a really interesting way. I figured it'd be fun to reconnect them and see what they had to say about it. The Promise Ring were sort of at the top of the emo heap in the late 1990s, though everybody hated that word with a passion back then. They were early fans of Jimmy Eat World music, and the bands toured together a few times over the years. By the end of the century, the Promise Ring had hit a weird rough patch. Von Bohlen had surgery for a brain tumor, and the band was naturally forced to slow down considerably. When they returned with their much-anticipated fourth album, Woodwater, it represented what felt at the time like a pretty intense left turn. The songs were slower and more melodic, not necessarily what fans were expecting. The album has gotten a rightful reappraisal in the 20 years since its release. The Promise Ring split up soon after, and Davey went on to form the band Maritime with Promise Ring drummer Dan Didier, and they released a string of great records that you should definitely check out. Jimmy Eat World also found themselves at a crossroads 20 years ago, having parted company with a major label. They self-funded a new album. That album, 2001's Bleed American, spawned a left-field hit for the band, a song called The Middle. It launched Jimmy Eat World into the mainstream before they knew what hit them, and it's one of those songs that, to this day, you might hear on the radio. It was a blip, of course, in a consistently fantastic career. Jimmy Eat World kept making records and touring. Their latest is 2019's Surviving. So it was an interesting point in time for both of these guys, who, as you'll hear, remain fast friends after all these years. Playing music isn't a huge part of Von Bohlen's life anymore, though he does point out that Maritime is technically still a band. Good news. These two chat about their 20-ish-year-old records, fatherhood, drinking, touring in the 90s, and lots more. Davey tells a great story I hadn't heard before about the Promise Ring's insane pact with each other in their earliest days. Sadly, Jim and Davey never get around to talking about Davey's guest vocals on Bleed American, but maybe we'll just have to have them chat again sometime. Enjoy.
Was that the place you took us, Champs? It's weird when people want to know stuff about like that time touring and what the quote unquote scene was like during those times, because it's like there was nobody there. It was just us and like maybe like 6 other people in a basement most of the time, and it's just funny that it's such a big deal now.
I feel like I lose people when we talk about how you book tours and it's like, oh, but you got the Radio Shack dialer and then you switched out the mechanics of it with a soldering gun. And then you could like mock the payphone sound. And that's how we like booked tours, because we couldn't afford the long distance bill on our actual phone.
Even starting that sentence with, first you go to a payphone, you kind of lose, right. You kind of lose about 80% of the people.
Right. Yeah.
So we use our trucker's atlas to get close to the town.
Right.
And then, you dial the promoter's beeper or something, and then they get back to you with directions to the club. And at that moment, you always experience this twinge of dread, like maybe they just bailed on the gig and you're actually not playing that night, because that happens.
Right. Probably still happens. I do feel like I'm at least aware enough that like nothing really has changed. There's still basement shows with 6 people, with some tight-knit scene. It's just we're not one of the 6 anymore.
Yeah, as connected as everyone thinks they are, there could be this insane hardcore scene across town that I've never know about.
My brother has always kind of lived in that scene, so I know it exists. I just am not nearly cool enough to like have any awareness to any of it anymore.
I don't think it's a lack of coolness, Davey, for you. I think it's just there's so much. Like you can't possibly keep up with it all. Like of course you're not going to know about the thing next door because, you have a cosmic number of other things competing for your attention and time. Does it freak you out when records you worked on have anniversaries that end in 5 and 0 now?
No, you won't know. When I think of your experiences, that is crazy to me. there feels like a falling off point to me. And that falling off point feels 100 million years ago. So to me, everything feels old.
Right.
And everything feels like, where I feel like if I was still, you're in your studio, like if I still went to the studio and had more of a linear experience to that, it would freak me out more. Like I can't imagine going on stage and like having nearly the self-confidence it would take to drag my ass out on stage and perform. Like legit. No, 100%. That is exactly how I feel. Like I would never, ever be able to convince myself that was a good idea. That's how removed I feel. Like I don't know where the truth lies or whether that matters, but that's how removed I feel.
Yeah, I mean, you want to do it or you don't. It could be that simple. Maybe it's a little bit more nuanced than that in the sense of what you want to do is meeting your expectations or it isn't. And is that good enough to want it? Or is it not good enough to take the priority over other things? I mean, everyone has to kind of come to that decision on, I think at some point, how much they want to make it their life. Because it's really like, you don't clock out.
Right.
There's trade-offs.
I think that's where I started to falter. And it's so funny that it's you and I talking, because in 90% of the scenarios where I would have this conversation, I would be like, oh, well, my kids are the oldest. I was the first one to get married and kind of like move towards some of that like adulthood stuff. But talking to you guys, like you guys were, especially Zach, I remember being on, being on the road and like in your guys' room, Zach would have like the blanket over his head talking to his wife and like talking about his daughter's grades and stuff. And I was like, my mind was like completely blown by like that idea of like trying to like navigate that, which seemed like massively huge life stuff. And then also like, be on tour and like, committed. Or
it wasn't long after that I think, everybody started having kids. And
yeah, I mean, at the time, obviously, it felt like a million miles away. And then it was like, 18 months or something.
Out of like your friends, were you one of the first people to quote unquote settle down somewhat?
Yeah. I know your oldest son is a little older than mine, but about the same, right? Because my son will be 18 in like 2 months.
Yeah, mine's 19. So
yeah, I was the first one in the band to get married. Definitely the first one in the band to have kids, buy a house, which is like stuff that like puts you on the hook a little bit. I don't want it to sound old or whatever, but like, like there's just like pulls on your priorities a little bit, right? So It's like, and on your choices and on your like time that you can spend. So it just changes it a little bit. And I think that's probably one of the more like things, the more negative like feelings that I had like throughout like the last 10 years of playing music for me was like, I had the most pull away and I always just felt guilty about it. Like those guys wanted to do some like cool stuff and I'd be like, yeah, but I don't really want to, or like, I don't really want to make that choice.
Guilty like not being present for the growing family, but guilty for not being like as invested as the other guys in the music project.
I chose the band and like, left my wife hanging a bunch of times, but it really felt like at the end, the less viable it seemed to be, the more exotic the tour we would be offered, like, I don't know, well, right. You'll just do Singapore, Hong Kong and like weird parts of the Far East you've never been to. I mean, it's going to net no money, and then I'd be like, that'd be super great to do though. But then you take it back to the family and be like, yeah, I'm going to be gone for 2 months. I'm going to make no money.
But I get to do all this cool stuff.
Right. Yeah. So I feel like it cost those guys a bunch of cool experiences.
Yeah. It might be a better sell if you could pitch it as if there was an opportunity to bring them into it and have like share some of that,
100%. I think everybody at this point, at the time, they were probably like, son of this guy is so, but I think now they'd be like, I mean, everyone would agree that it's like, whatever, but.
Is that something that you end up talking about a lot? Like where's Davey? Like people kind of want to get in your head about it, that you're not really doing music much anymore.
If people are talking about it, they're not talking to me about it. So nobody like asks me like, oh, why don't you do anything? Like people whose kids I coached basketball to in the last like 7 or 8 years, who maybe heard that song Milwaukee we wrote, on the radio for like 6 months, or like, you still doing music? Those are the people that talk to me about music. Not like I get like I said at the top of this, like talking to you, like whatever that was 6-9 months ago was like one of the more recent conversations with people that I've known from way back that I've had.
Other musicians are far too into themselves to really care about like what what the other musicians are doing or not doing.
That's not true. Scott Shanebeck texts me not often, but fairly regularly when he's like drunk somewhere and something hits like, oh dude, you should be here right now or whatever. Like this reminds me of, whatever stupid thing we did,
We got to hang out with Scott not too long ago.
Yeah, probably got a 2 a.m. text from him about
updates. He was live tweeting you.
So let me, while we're in this phase of this conversation, let me ask. So you said you haven't drank in like 10 years. Did you say that?
9 and change.
Still, that is so hard to imagine for me that you still play shows, because that was like, and in probably one of the more sadder admissions that I'll make. Hopefully, one of the sadder admissions that I'll make is like definitely at the end of like doing tours of Maritime, when Eric Axelson was still traveling with us. There'd be like the looking at your watch like, it's 6:30, so I better have 2 beers like right now, or else I won't be very much fun in a minute.
Yeah.
So I commend you on your ability to keep going. And I don't want to sound like I'm some sad sack either, but but it felt like it felt like a little utilitarian at the time, which is, I guess, another reason that I continue to make the choice not to do it, because it's like clearly at that point my heart wasn't really in it.
That sounds like a completely healthy decision, I mean, yeah, sure. Drinking a lot to make the thing you kind of don't have your heart in more palatable to do. That's not really that healthy, but like then taking the action to cut out the thing you don't really want to do, yeah, I get it. That's totally okay. For me, it wasn't really necessarily cutting out the thing I didn't want to do or trying to enjoy the thing I did do. It was just what I did. I'm like one of those people.
Well, good on you, man. I definitely still drink, but my God, if I had a third beer in a day, like that would be like a ton.
Once you take the rock and roll out of it, you become like a normal drinker. Then that's great.
I'm sure you have memories of things you did with Philip Stira that you're like, how in the world in that like 12-hour period did we not get arrested like 4 times? When he convinced you that the cops don't work on weekends. Yeah.
I was like, I don't know. He's German. I'm in Germany. What he's saying I want it to make sense. So I'm going to go along with it.
Right. It was just for like at least a 5-year period. It was just such a massive part of that. It was like getting messed up.
Yeah. It's everywhere. It's socially acceptable. It's kind of like, in a cliche, it's kind of expected that you can party.
Yeah.
And keep it together and be impervious to the effects afterwards. And skate through any potential consequences.
Right.
And it's, in a lot of cases it's free. And it's, in you're miles away from any actual responsibilities.
So let's change gears. Let's talk about this stuff on Josh's list here so we can't...
Does Josh have a list?
Well, it's not a list. It's he's hoping we can talk about Woodwater and Bleed American because they're both turning 20.
I remember at the time when you guys made Woodwater, you specifically wanted somebody you didn't have a history with, who wasn't looking at the material from the frame of a scene and was just looking at it from the frame of like, here are some songs. Let's make the best songs into recordings possible.
I don't remember that specifically.
Maybe Jason mentioned that, but I think I'm pretty sure that
it's so funny because Jason was the one prior when we were like just in the period of writing all these songs. Jason was like, we should just change the name of the band. And I remember that being like, that is the dumbest idea. I was like so offended by the idea, just in its illogic, like, why would you continue to do exactly, but just one day just change the name of the band and like basically lose all of the momentum? But every decision we made from that moment forward, looking back now, like trying to get someone who wasn't at all familiar with the band that would have like maybe helped us with the conversation of how do you tie the things together. Every decision we made was made in favor of like, we should have just changed the band's name.
Well, I mean, putting that aside, like just thinking about the record itself, like, I mean, do you feel like you got what you wanted? Like when you're looking back at decisions and how they played out, like, I don't know, that's kind of not up to you. Even on your best days, if you're doing everything you think you should, still, it's not up to you how it plays out. Maybe changing your name of your band is a little extreme, but like wanting to branch out and get someone outside the quote unquote scene to see what they would bring to it.
No, for sure. You guys experienced a lot of those same years where it's like, man, like you didn't really have time to think. You were like so caught in the cycle. Whereas like, I mean, you might talk in the van, like, but like that's the only time like any sort of like non-grind conversation, you know, like everything was so in the grind that you're like, don't really ever come up for air. So being that we like came up for so much air, that just made it a weird experience. Like there was no way that was not going to be a weird experience, whether the record was going to sound different or whatever. I think we turned over the band twice within the making of that record, you know, with going from Scott Shaneback to, or we added Scott Shaneback. God, I don't even know when we added him at some point during that time. Maybe we wrote a record with him. I don't even remember at this point, but like, you know, he left the band for Woodwater basically. So when, while we were writing and recording, we didn't really have a bass player. There was literally nothing that was like consistent or like normal, I think at the time maybe. So hindsight being what it is, like you mentioned, it was going to be a crazy experience regardless. Had it been like wildly successful or wildly terrible failure, and I think it landed somewhere in the middle, you know, I think it would have been weird regardless.
You definitely got something that you hadn't done before.
That's true. Yeah. It definitely felt like on its way. Like in that process of making a record, when you're like finding your way a little bit, you write songs and it's like, oh, that's kind of it, but maybe not all the way it. And so I think that there was like it's kind of like a pathway. You never get to the clearing, I guess is kind of how I see that record, because we just never really finished it, I guess. It's a weird thing being like, for having that be the last Promise Ring record, you know, like just because it was like grind, little break, total flux, end of band. And those periods were like in time, like equal spaces, oddly, you know, like especially like in that grind stage. And I think Jimmy Eat World definitely had that. Like there was probably three records came out in the span of like 3 years, you know, right? And tours in between. And I mean, that like defines so much of who you were, but it was like, it's a blip, right? Now it's a blip on the screen, but it's like, you know, between the space between Bleed American, you know, and Clarity is like very small, but like it's a huge portion of how people think of you.
And I feel like we were very busy that whole in between time.
Right. Yeah. No, there's no zero downtime between any of that, right? I mean, Static Prevails, you know, came out, but it feels like it hit, but then right behind it, I remember talking to you and you were saying like, and this Clarity record we have, everyone's going to hate. And I'm trying to think of who you said it sounded like. Maybe you told me you made a record that sounds like Jesus and Mary Chain and everyone's going to hate it.
I can see maybe younger me thinking that something like Lucky Denver Mint could have been on Honey's Dead. You know, like the bells and extra weird kind of things and I don't know, simplifying melodies.
Sure.
I think Jesus and Mary Chain back then was probably like the ultimate goal of songwriting for me. So of course I would be like thinking we were shooting for that. Right. It still kind of is, really. You're always going to think what you're doing is a total stretch, but other people might not, you know? Like I think Woodwater definitely sounds like new, but it's still you. It still sounds like you guys. I don't think it's that crazy of a stretch, but it's definitely like pushing into new things that you guys hadn't done before, you know? It's crazy that you think of it more of like a document of exploration. Because from my perspective, it sounds pretty well fleshed out. Like you were crafting things and you had thought about things and you made intentional decisions about the way things sounded and, you know, where instrument leads would happen, you know, because they go away. You know, like I think that's this isn't really landing the plane, but I think that was a common mistake of ours as kids. Like instrument leads never went away. They were just like the thing that happened along with anything else anybody else in the band wanted to have as a hook. They just throw it all in there and everyone gets to do their cool thing the whole song.
Yeah, I don't know if I ever learned that particular lesson. I knew it at some point. I knew it was there, but I don't know if I ever ever put it into practice. But no, it's true. At some point, we all definitely thought like intensity is like quantity and, you know, speed. Like the more things you can do and the faster and louder it can be is more intensity. Like And then obviously at some point you realize like, no, like empty space is like a huge poignant thing. You know, that record definitely has some empty space. So I'll give it that. I feel like we wrote it when we weren't really even in band mode. You know, we were like, there was less organic feel to it for like from the writing perspective. So it kind of felt like, oh, if we can like put this back into the Promise Ring, this will be like a thing. But we just never did that. So for me, it feels like kind of a dangling. That's probably why I feel the way it is, even though maybe from an outside perspective, it doesn't feel at all like that.
I'm wondering if like before Woodwater, if you guys were used to just being together all the time, working that way, and then having to transition to a different way of writing kind of made it feel like less cohesive.
Yeah, no, there was definitely like less band practice at the band practice space where you all picked up your instruments, you played through your set, and then you were like, oh, yeah, you know, like let's jam on some riffs. You know, like there was certainly less of that at that point.
Every once in a while, I think it'd be fun to jam on riffs.
Right, and then like when everyone gets lost, like, no, I think we found the change.
Yeah, right.
Like,
it's when you think about like how you wrote when you were a kid, like it's kind of funny. I think it's funny
for sure
because it was let's throw everything in. Okay, what are we doing next? How about this? Oh, that's great. Well, yeah, I got a part for that. Cool. All right. Then it goes here. Yeah. Okay, great.
Right.
Anything else? No, that's the song.
Maritime was more of a jam on riffs band than Promise Ring, and I guess Maritime's still together, so I shouldn't use the past tense because you know there's still another record in there somewhere probably. Breaking news on it for Josh here, but we would jam on riffs all the time. That was like kind of how we wrote, which was I guess why we all enjoyed it. Once you get to that point where you like, and maybe you didn't experience this, but like no one really like expected or cared if we did anything. Like it's probably been 7 years since we have been in the same room together, but like no one noticed for like 2 or 3 years. You know, like nobody said like, oh, is Maritime over? And I don't think anyone's ever asked me that yet. But you know, like it's different so we like jamming on riffs and like that type of thing where it's like this might turn into a song or not. Like it's a little bit more of a freedom to do that. It was more about like, oh, it's Thursday night, so I'm gonna stay up late and like hang out with dudes and probably drink a few too many beers. You know, if we find some songs in there, that would be awesome.
Yeah.
You know, like, but it's certainly not like important that we do.
You're more likely to actually complete things when that isn't the goal.
Right.
If you can turn off your expectations for it and just let it kind of happen, then like you're going to find something that you're into, or even if you don't, like you're going to probably enjoy yourself, or even the fact that you're going through the motions is going to like keep your chops up.
Right. God, I didn't realize how much time had passed actually since until I said 7 years. I was like, dang, time really goes.
When was Bleed American and Woodwater, when did they come out the same year? They weren't long apart from each other. Oh, they were a year apart.
That makes sense then, because then you would have been through Bleed American, and it would make sense that you had the studio, it was still new, and you guys would have been like starting to write. Maybe.
Yeah.
I think the only Woodwater touring we did with you guys was in Europe. We definitely did like England, and I think we met you in Scotland. It was very jet lagged, and some kid kept screaming, like straight in front of me, kept screaming, "Where's Jimmy?" Like the whole set of ours. He was just, every time we stopped making noise, he would like pull himself up on the barrier and yell, "Where's Jimmy?" I was like, dude, I think we all know where they actually are. It's like, is this rhetorical? I'm having a little bit of a hard time here, man. You can stop yelling. That would be cool.
I remember being in Germany with you, I think.
We did Promise Ring Jimmy Eat World, like Philip Stira,
Yeah.
Maximum Party tours. We did.
Yeah.
We definitely did that. But I think we also did, once you guys broke and did the big tour, and we were just like opening band that people for the most part did not want to hear.
What was the reaction like from you guys and people that you were around when everyone saw Bleed American kind of like take off?
You know, it's hard to remember that because I'm so used to, at this point, trying to anchor my whole like existence to you guys. When straight people ask me like, like, oh, so you were in a band for 20 years, whatever. It's like, oh yeah. And then like, they kind of like nod, like I'm nodding yes, but I mean no for like a really long time until I say, until I'm like, okay, well, Jimmy Eat World. And they'll be like, oh yeah. Then they're like, it all makes sense as soon as I say that. But I mean, so going to when it like legit hit, I don't remember it being a big thing around us, but for us in the band, I think it was like after having like, because we did a bunch of touring on Clarity with you guys, like did the US, and I think that's when we did the Europe Madness, tour. So and I'm assuming we did do that tour, right? I'm not just making it up. You guys.
I remember very specifically being on a bus with you in Styria in Germany, but that was also when you guys were doing like you got on 120 minutes, I think, when we were opening up for you guys. Which I got to say, opening up for you guys was definitely one of the things that I think helped propel us to the next level. And we definitely wouldn't be where we are now if it wasn't for your guys seeing something in what we were doing that you thought was cool.
This is on brand Jim Adkins. I'm not going to sit through it, man. Like, you guys were superstars from the minute we met. The minute Kerry Washington said, hey, you guys should meet my friends from Phoenix. Like, the minute we saw you guys play, it was like, oh, like, these dudes are good at this. Like, you guys did not break character one time in the 100 odd years. Yeah, I'm sure you felt like you had bad shows, but it was like, oh my God, it's there. I mean, because we were, and it's actually one thing that I really liked about us. It was like, we might play 2 songs and walk off to booze, or we might have the greatest show of our lives, but I don't know, So I think that's in especially my nature, and apparently the natures of the people I played in a band with, but you guys were the exact opposite. And we were so jealous of it all the time. It was like, man, these guys like are always going to like have a good show. They are always going to do the thing they do, and everyone's going to love it.
I've never seen you guys walk off after 2 songs being booed.
It's happened.
You ever end up at a gig where it was like nine much more hardcore bands than you and you?
Like the first 4 years of the band, probably, yeah. I mean, the entire first European tour we did.
You ever end up with like 9 other ska bands than you?
I think that would have been more fun.
If your loops would have been like Southern California and Utah, then you probably would have ended up in that situation.
Right. But it's funny how big the world was, right? I mean, like when you guys were like so far away.
Yeah.
The West Coast for a long time, like in our like punk rock circles, was like, you want to lose money, go to the West Coast, man. Like nobody, you got to be, to make it, like to survive the Denver, whatever, the Denver, Boise, Seattle, and like, you're spent a lot of expenses, right? So like to survive all the way back around and back through, like you better either have a fat wad of cash, or like you better be somebody. Like that was the thinking for a long time.
That's all we knew was like, it's 10 hours here.
Mm-hmm.
It's 7 hours here. We were like kind of shocked when we got to the East Coast and it was like, like hour and a half, 2 hours max from Florida up to New York, Boston.
So we haven't talked enough about Bleed American though, because you guys actually have some experiences from that. When the middle hit, it was like the song of the summer, right? It was freaking everywhere. But when it hit, because those 2 weeks when a song like that hits, and I remember hearing Nirvana, started 4 guys in a cargo van and finished the tour on an airplane. So it's like when it hits, and obviously that's probably not, no offense, but probably not the experience you had, but something like that.
We definitely noticed leading up to Bleed American being released that like the shows got a little bit better. Maybe there'd be more people. Maybe we'd be opening for like, a bigger band. There was just this trajectory that seemed like it was, it was encouraging. And, when we got to Europe, like Clarity was actually getting way bigger in Germany after Bleed American was made, but before we had a label for it. And so we got to ride on a bus for the first time in Germany.
Right.
All of these things happened kind of incrementally. And it wasn't that weird to think that something got a little bit better. And we'd also had so many experiences that we just thought were a joke that that the more crazy experiences kind of got filed away into the hey, this is weird, rather than really letting it sink in and think, wow, this is real. It wasn't until like the like mid 2003 that I realized what had happened.
It's very interesting. That was not my experience with it. It was like, whoa, this is like the hit of the year, and these guys did it.
That's another thing that no one's going to understand now, is that when something took off, it took off everywhere all at once. And like this, it happened regularly. Something would just blow up. And when it did, it was everywhere and everything. There was way less niche. Even if your whole thing was ska and the ska scene, you'd still know Smells Like Teen Spirit was everywhere. You'd still know Candlebox had a song or whatever was like big at the time, even if it wasn't like your thing.
Wow, Candlebox.
Don't ask why. I just thought of that. It was just thinking about the late 90s, that sort of, or Collective Soul.
It's not where I would have gone, but I'm glad you took it there.
Maybe because we mixed Bleed American in the studio that was previously like Maverick. And I had to look at a Candlebox Platinum record every day going to mix that thing.
Speaking of band, and I literally paused on Candlebox because I was just having a conversation of like, what's the worst song ever? And I always say it's Crazy Town, that Butterfly song. To me, that's like the most offensive piece of music out there. So, but I hadn't thought of Candlebox, so I'll have to do a terribleness side by side later.
Come, my lady, come, my lady.
Yes. Yeah, it's like so offensive.
That's a hook.
Right. But I mean, like outside of the musical part of it, it's just so offensive. Full stop. And then like the whole presentation is offensive in its own way. And then you get to the music, where it's like it watered down 311 thing or whatever they were doing.
Maybe you should look up their cover of New Noise.
Boy. I'm not trying to shovel deeper, unfortunately.
Let's get Davey talking so much trash he can never come back.
I think I'm already there. I'm just trying to cling on to the rays of light. You know what I mean? I can't go deeper into the darkness at this point in my life.
Are you playing at all lately? How often do you pick up a guitar?
We moved houses like 18 months ago. So now I have like, the stereo that sat in the basement forever and all of my LPs that were like my brother housed for me for all that time, like are now actually in a spot. So music's kind of coming back for me a little bit. Probably I pick up a guitar like once a week. That's more than I used to, for sure. When you like stop at mediocre, you never lose it. I think if I like you said, keeping your chops, like if you never have chops, you never decline chops. So I think I'm still the average rhythm guitar player that I always have been.
You need a slightly better story. You should say like, I don't want to be too good because then I won't be able to, it'll influence my expression.
The only reason I play guitar, and this is the real story, this is the no holds barred, honest truth, Jim Adkins. The only reason I play guitar at all is because I don't sing well enough to sing in a band. Like I wanted to just be the singer, like mic cord wrapped around my arm, like, body passing, like frontman, but it didn't sing good. So no one was like, why would we add you? Yeah.
Were you just the singer in 10 Boy Summer?
No, ironically, I was just the guitar player. I think I hollered in the background like anyone would, but I did not sing in that band.
That's another thing. It's like out of nowhere, I remember the Food Not Bombs comp that was on, but I don't remember significant portions of like this last year.
That's definitely memory, right? Like we have those like burnt imprint moments and then like minutia in between until your next imprint moment. Yeah,
I mean, maybe that's in part because like in all that time was like some kind of major life discovery things, kind of parenting yourself on a level that you might not have thought of before. I mean, the newness of it all kind of made everything stick out.
I mean, with our kids, our oldest sons specifically, we have that shared experience being like, I mean, he's probably older than you were when you were like giving your life to this, right? Like when you were like making a conscious choice. And people ask me all that time. This is like a key interview question I get, and I don't know if you get it because you have stuff currently going on, so people don't ever want to talk about the all the way beginning like they do me. But people be like, how did it, like what made Promise Ring work or whatever? And I have like a definite answer. We sat around a table and we're like, everybody who thinks that they're going to have anything else in their life in the next 5 years, fuck off. Like, we are doing this for 5 years and we're going to play 1 million shows and give everything we can. And if at that point it doesn't work, whatever. We're like, everybody, you just put everything on hold for 5 years. And I think after like 5 months, we wanted to kill each other. But, but I think, somehow like it like lasted just long enough. So the only control that we had were like, we're not doing shit. We're not going to have a weak link. The one guy who like wants to spend time with his girlfriend, so the band breaks up. The one person that wants to like hold down a real job and get paid money and have a car. Like, these people are useless. We need like 4 people that are not going to make any choices except for the band. And you guys seem like you'd be way too casual, especially at the teenage points in your life. But that was our secret for success.
I mean, that's what you're doing.
Well, for sure.
Anyway, like it's kind of what you're doing anyway. But it was sort of news to me when I was already doing that I had chosen that.
Can you even imagine your son like approaching you and being like, this is what I'm doing? I mean, and not so much in that you'd be like, no, that's a terrible idea and it's unsafe. And maybe you would, but not so much in that way, but just in like I don't even believe people would be as like just incoherent and just out there. Like, oh yeah, I'm 17. I'm just going to get in a van with like 3 other irresponsible dudes. And we are going to like, drive around in this like piece of garbage, with the heat full on blast so it doesn't overheat, and like make this happen. Like, can you even imagine?
What are you doing for money? I don't know. Where are you staying? I don't know. How are you going to eat? I don't know. I'm on tour.
Right. But can you even imagine like not only like your acceptance of it, but like your son being like, this is it. This is the plan.
Would you try to talk him out of it?
Would I? I mean, being that I had the exact specific experience in part, yeah. Right. Where you'd be like, okay, but cool. Hindsight being 2020 for me, like these are like some of the dominoes. Like if you choose them, like choose them. But like you should know, like you're not going to feel at home in your hometown because you're going to be gone 10 months of the year for the next 10 years.
Yeah.
You'll come back and your friends will have totally different friends.
Courtney Marie Andrews. Do you know her?
I think maybe I met her in Milwaukee if she was with you at that point.
Yeah.
When I ran on stage for 14 seconds.
She sang on a couple songs on our Invented record. And I was, I thought like, we should just get her to be on tour with us and cover these parts because it'd be so rad. I wouldn't have to sing all the hard parts on some other songs and she could cover that. We could finally have like the keyboards that happen on the record, like live, it would just open up so much doors for it. She shreds on guitar, so we could have her do that sometimes too. And I kind of laid it out, but she really had, at that point, she'd been on tour and like done some pretty hardcore touring on her own. But I was like, okay, here's what's going to happen. Like, if you think this is something that you want to do, like, this is really all I can think of that I'm actually asking you. Like, here's where I've been. Here's the pitfalls. Here's what's going to be rad. Here's what's going to be freaky. Here's what you're giving up, or here's what you have to do. And anything else, you kind of have to give it up. Like, make this informed choice about what you're doing.
Right.
I say all that to say, like, that's all you can really do with your kids is hope that enough has kind of gone sideways up until now that they're actually going to give what you have to say a shot. And it's not just dad,
right.
You're coming from a deficit. This is totally not rock and roll, but you're coming from a deficit just being dad. Like kids go through that phase of like starts when they're about 2.5 to 3 of like, I do it. Like they don't even know where it's coming from, but like it comes back again somewhere around puberty of like, they don't even understand where it comes from. They want to be independent. They want to parent themselves. You just hope that you've kind of made enough sense to them over the years that they can weigh what you're bringing on them with a sound, an open mind.
Right. No, for sure. Can't even imagine the first part where they are interested in that before I can even imagine how I would react. You know what I mean?
I'd be stoked that they'd found something they want to make their life. They're that passionate about something. I mean, I knew this is what I wanted to do.
Certainly till the moment I found music, I was like, I can't even see myself growing up, like, much like doing something,
What am I going to do what am I going to do as an adult? Like, I don't want to do anything. Like,
I would be probably just like you. I'd be happy that they were like stoked on something, because if you're not, it's much harder path. I think for both of us, right, when we were like kind of in that decision of like, all right, the next phase of life is coming, we were like I'm running in the opposite direction, and it's like happens to also be towards something that I am super passionate about. So that obviously made everything easier, but
yeah. Also, I think like it you don't have to figure it all out at once.
Yeah.
As much as society and your parents are want you to have it figured out, like you really don't.
Oh yeah. Right. No, totally.
This is such a bummer, not rock and roll thing to talk about right now. What people really want to know. Parenting with Davey and Jim. Well, I mean, back when we were doing it, it was not cool. You were not on a good path if you were doing what we were doing.
Right.
You were not at all on a good path if you were doing what we were doing when we were doing it. And now it's like, yeah, sure, High School Musical, like whatever.
Right. Yeah, pop culture changed a little bit.
It's still odd having conversations with like other parents who have like actual jobs,
What's funny, and maybe you have this too, but like when you meet your neighbors, like you probably have it like right away where it's like, I'm out, I'm this guy, I'm in a band, whatever. And then they acclimate to that concept. My experience is totally different. My experience is that they don't know and they think you're normal until at one point they like somehow trip over a YouTube video, and then it's like you like I can see them coming. And maybe you have a little bit of this because they might not connect right away. I would imagine in Phoenix they probably do, but it's like months down the road where someone will be like, they'll come walking across the yard or the cul-de-sac or what have you and be like, I know who you are. And I can, the minute they like come walking at me, I know where this is headed right away, where I'm like, oh, you found out.
When my kids were like in 4th grade or something, I did like Christmas Carol leading in class. And there was, other parents there volunteering, helping out. And one of the other dads I got to be friends with, and like a year later, he was like, I thought you were like the music teacher that day. Like, I thought you were like a substitute music teacher coming in to do this. And like, I had no idea who you were and what you did. Like, I must not have been that great at Christmas caroling then.
Don't you have a great story of tying this all in for the podcast? But didn't you carry it? And maybe this is like a second, third hand story that I never heard directly from you, but from other people, where you karaoke'd at a bar and did Jimmy World songs.
Yeah.
And didn't win like a competition.
Yeah, it was a competition. I lost to someone that did a really, really spot on version of Damn, I Wish I Was Your Lover. I got to give it up. They beat me hands down, fair and square.
That is such a great, like, it's so like hypothetical. Like, what if you went in and did your own karaoke? It's so amazing that happened.
That was when I still drank. It seemed like a great idea after a couple that.
Well, I don't want to play devil's advocate here, but that tale alone is an advertisement for drinking, in my opinion. Because that is amazing that it happened.
I've also failed out pretty quickly doing our songs on Guitar Hero.
Oh, really? Oh,
yeah.
Man.
Being in the band doesn't give you any extra credit when you try to play Guitar Hero.
I never got a hang of that at all, which might speak to my actual guitar skills too. But
well, it's good talking to you, Davey.
Yeah, man. I'm glad you could do it.
Good to see you, man.
Thanks for listening to the Talkhouse Podcast, and thanks to Davey von Bohlen and Jim Adkins for chatting. If you liked what you heard, please follow Talkhouse on your favorite podcasting platform and check out all the great written pieces on talkhouse.com. This episode was produced by Myron Kaplan, and the Talkhouse theme is composed and performed by The Range. See you next time.